Deep Sea Expedition Encounter. This story is not mine but my uncle's. I will clarify that while I believe this story to be true, there is a lot of room for speculation. I'll start out with some background information. My uncle has been a marine biologist for the past 50 years. He is now in his 60s and has spent the last 25 years teaching marine biology at a university. His area of expertise has been the North and Mid-Atlantic Ocean. Growing up, every time we would visit him in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, he would tell us countless stories of the numerous deep-sea expeditions he participated in. Prior to his teaching years, he was primarily a researcher. Every single story was interesting and filled with wonder. The story I'm about to tell is the only one that has me questioning what is really out there in the deep ocean. For the sake of this story, I'll refer to my uncle as Uncle Jay, or just Jay, to keep some semblance of anonymity. This story begins when Uncle Jay was getting ready to embark on an upcoming expedition to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. The research vessel they would be traveling on was a medium-sized vessel around 80 meters long, one of those ships with a crane. It was crewed by maybe 20 men, and there were about 15 marine biologists of various specialties attending. It was early summertime in the late 90s. I'm unsure of the exact date, and Uncle Jay was about 30 at the time. He said they couldn't have had a better day for loading the vessel. The ocean was calm and the weather was beautiful. They would be out at sea for the next month and a half. All weather forecasts looked promising. Once the ship was loaded, they embarked on their journey. It took them approximately a week to reach the ridge. The primary goal of this expedition was to examine and possibly identify new species of sea life in that region. Additionally, they wanted to examine how known species lived. They didn't have any submarines, so in order to find any new species, they had an intriguing plan. Using the crane on board the ship, they attached cow carcasses to the hook and lowered them into the water near the ocean floor. A few feet away from the hook were multiple cameras and lights to observe any sea life that might devour the carcass. Uncle Jay said they had about 10 carcasses. They would begin their journey in the northern portion, lower the carcasses into the water for a few days, and move south along the ridge, repeating this process. When the carcasses were lowered in, the ship would power down all engines and simply drift. If they drifted away from the ridge, they would power up and very slowly move back into position. Because this was a rather low-budget mission, the cameras on the hook didn't provide a live feed, and all footage was thoroughly examined after. That was about 48 hours of footage they had to sift through after each time they pulled the hook back up. They had been at this for about a week, and had not made any new discoveries, but did gain valuable footage of rarely seen sea life consuming the cows. At this point in the story, Uncle Jay said everything was going according to plan. The seas were calm, and everyone on board was enjoying their time. They were onto their 5th cow carcass. It was about 5 p.m., and they hooked it up and lowered it into the water. This portion of the ridge they were at was about 3,500 meters deep, and was pushing the limit of how much cable they had on the crane. Now, for this mission, 2 of the marine biologists were required to monitor the crane and their location in relation to the ridge all times. My uncle and another biologist drew the short straw and had to watch overnight. They would swap out around 9 a.m. Uncle Jay said it was an uneventful night. Him and the other biologist chatted all night and bounced different theories off each other. Around 7 a.m., just as the sun was rising, all was calm, almost too calm, Jay remarked. They hadn't drifted off course throughout the night. The ocean was like glass. Much of the crew was beginning to rise as well. But what happens next is a complete shock to everyone on board. It's important to note that the crane had been angled off the right side of the ship. All of a sudden, and very rapidly, the 80-meter-long vessel began listing to the right side. It was almost as if something grabbed the hook and began pulling it deeper. My uncle said the immediate panic he felt was unlike anything he experienced. He said it felt like the ship was going to capsize. They immediately sounded the ship's onboard alarm system to notify the crew of an emergency. Once they had their faculties in order after their initial shock, my uncle ordered the other biologist to begin reeling in the crane. Since the cabling was so long, it would take about 20 minutes to completely reel in the line. The other biologist began to reel in the crane, but the winch was struggling, and the ship was leaning more and more into the water. My uncle said that just as water began to pour over the right side of the ship, it smacked back down to an upright position. He was sent flying into some containers. Many of the crew had begun to come out now as well. There were several injured on board, but nothing was life-threatening. Over the next 20 minutes, as the crane was still retracting the line, the crew asked their injured